I get my shot and I promise it's wet. Waited too long, but I told him I'm next.
This camera setup costs over $6,000, but this camera setup only costs $2,500. So today we're gonna figure out, is there really that big of a difference and is it worth the money? The Sony FX3 is one of the most popular all-around cameras for filmmakers of any type, really. It's an incredibly versatile and powerful camera that performs well in low light, has great colors, and comes in a compact form factor that a lot of people really love. And when paired with the Tamron 35 to 150 millimeter f2.2.8 lens, it becomes one of the most versatile camera packages, in my opinion, that you can have. But it doesn't come at a cheap price tag. Alternatively, the Sony FX30, also a very powerful and popular camera in its own right, comes in at a much cheaper price tag of $1,800, but it does come with what could be seen as a pretty considerable drawback to some people, which is that it is a crop sensor camera. One of the benefits of being a crop sensor camera, fortunately, is that you can also pair the Sony FX30 with cheaper lenses. So today I've got the Sony FX30 paired with the Tamron 17 to 70 millimeter lens, which retails for $700, and we're going to compare this combo of the Sony FX30 with the Tamron 17 to 70 with this combo of the FX3 paired with the Tamron 35 to 150, which, by the way, this lens costs a whopping $1,900 US, to see, is it worth paying over $6,000 after tax for this very powerful, very versatile, but very expensive setup? Or does it make more sense to save a few $1,000s, pay less than half the money, and get this also competent, possibly just as good, depending on what you're using it for, setup of the Sony FX30 and the Tamron 17 to 70? We're going to start by comparing the two lenses, talking about some of the pros and cons of each, why they differ so much in price, and then we're going to go film a basketball game with each of these cameras to show them in the same environment next to each other and decide if the difference is really worth it. So let's start with the expensive lens here, the Tamron 35 to 150. This is a lens that I use quite a bit, and not just for basketball. I've used this lens for multiple sports and even non-sport related things, and just find it to be incredibly versatile and sharp throughout. It has a lot of custom function buttons as well. It has this option right here to lock the lens so that you can't zoom, and when I unlock this, you can now zoom the lens. You can see there's an 82 millimeter thread on the front, and then we also have 1, 2, 3 custom function buttons, along with 3 custom modes that we can toggle between, and an AF/MF switch right over here. The lens also has a USB-C outlet right over here where you can modify certain parameters of the lens and do firmware updates and all that type of stuff, and it is fully weather sealed. Like I said, that's a $1,900 lens, and it's very strong and it looks very sharp, and I love it. But it's a lot more expensive than this lens, the 17 to 70 from the same company, Tamron. Mind you, this lens is an aps-c lens. It only works on crop sensor cameras. If you try to use it on a full frame camera, you're going to get a big black vignette around the end of your image that you'll have to crop in to remove, which isn't good. And looking at the custom functions or buttons on this camera lens, you can see that it has none. There's no custom buttons on this lens. It's just a lens. There's no really ridges. There's no USB-C port. There's none of that. No, it's just a lens. Also, unlike the 35 to 150 millimeter lens that had an 82 millimeter thread size, the thread size here is only 67 millimeters, which means that you should be able to buy filters for this lens for cheaper. That's kind of just the theme of this lens, is it's cheaper. It still gives you a pretty wide focal range from 17 to 70, and on a crop sensor, the full frame equivalent of that is like what, about 35 to like 105 if my mental math is pretty good. So although it's not quite as versatile as 35 to 150, it's still not bad when you consider the 1.5x crop. But today we're going to go film a basketball game and put both of these lenses to the test. I'm going to film one half of the same basketball game with each of these camera and lens combos. We're going to do the first half with the Sony FX3 and the Tamron 35 to 150 to see just how good a more expensive, I guess, professional camera setup can get. And then we're gonna do the second half with the FX30 and the Tamron 17-70. But enough of me talking, let's hit the road. We'll talk more at the stadium and I'll get you some comparisons and test results. And also I think my lunch is ready, so we're gonna go grab that. It was a long weekend here in Canada, so the traffic was like just terrible. I think I was in the car for 2.5 hours, but we finally made it down here. Small kit today because I'm just kind of going handheld with both of those cameras. I'm gonna use them each handheld with a camera strap so I can kind of get like a similar handheld feeling experience. And they're not like too telephoto either. I will be turning on stabilization in my lens. I mean my camera rather. I'm gonna try to do active stabilization for both. But yeah, I haven't filmed here in a while, and I know the lighting in this gym is really good, which is why I was like willing to do the long drive. So I'm kind of excited for it today. I think on top of getting like good stuff for this video, it's just gonna be a fun time. And I think the footage is gonna look really good. So yeah, I'm stoked. Anyways, yeah, I'm gonna go on Google Maps now and figure out how to get to that stadium because tip-off's in an hour. Already during warm-ups, I've been able to see the difference between these two camera packages. I actually really enjoyed using the crop sensor setup more for warm-ups because that wide end on the 17-70mm has been really nice for filming wide shots of players dunking and crash zooming out as a player comes towards me under the basket. I'm also curious to see how useful I find the different focal ranges of these two lenses with their respective cameras when I'm filming proper game action. For these low light shots, the full frame camera and lens combo definitely came in clutch, and I don't think that crop sensor camera and lens would have been able to hold up next to it.
I'm on my prime, I'm feeling like Steph. Go get my shot and I promise it's wet. Waited too long, but I told him I'm next. I need my bag, just run me the check. Cable was mine, I ain't taking less. I told them all I'm as real as it gets. Shit be a shit, dog, I'm cutting the net. I thought I told them I came for my spot. They told me time is like money, that's why I done made it. I swear that I'm spending a lot. They never seen the hours I put in to get here, they only just see what I got. I spend my time in the lab all this winter. I swear that this summer is gonna be hot. I cannot lie on this. I paid a lot for this. They got some money to spend. I got some money to get. I gotta talk on this shit. I swear I told them I'm here. I feel like I'm in the league. I just keep making these hits. Took a little break, but I swear that I'm back. Won't ask anybody, put a city on the map.
Just getting a couple of game edits done. I'm gonna be switching now from the full frame camera down here to the crop sensor over here. I'm shooting all those intro and establishing shots with the full frame camera, the FX3 at ISO 12,800, and like I don't know how I would have done that on this camera. But we're past that point. We're just filming game action. And I'm pretty confident that even the low light capabilities of this camera can handle this environment at 60 frames per second. So we're gonna shoot the second half on this. We're gonna get back in the stands. We're gonna shoot the baseline and give it a try.
Yeah. I told my baby you're the only one I trust. I told my shawty you ain't gotta make a fuss. When I was down, out of luck, and you stuck.
So I've got the crop sensor camera set up on right now. I'm shooting at ISO 2500 and 60 frames per second with an overcrank shutter at 1/200. And I'm exposing SLR pretty perfectly. So far, this setup is actually holding up really well. And I love this angle from the crowd as well. Testing out this top angle like from the crowd and the mezzanine's been pretty cool. We're getting close to the end of the game. I'm going to pop down to courtside and get those final clutch shots.
I'ma keep it real with you. Yeah, yeah. Ay, yeah. I touch you, baby, you're the only one I need. But the gang gotta fly you overseas. It's on me, you know that it's a breeze.
camera, what I said earlier in the game, I am loving the photo length on this crop sensor for basketball, especially for the baseline.
I get my shot and I promise it's wet. Waiting too long, but I told him I'm next. I need my bag, they want me to check. Table was mine, I ain't taking less. I told them all I'm as real as it gets. Shit be a shit, dog, I'm cutting the net.
How long is like a drive back for you?
It was 2.5 hours on the way here. I'm hoping it'll be like 1 hour, 15, an hour and a half on the way back.
Okay, that's fair. Yes.
Yeah, man, this stuff is so fun. I love it.
Yeah.
And like, come on, that ending. All right, man, well, I appreciate you.
Yeah, no,
Thanks for having me out.
you, man.
Sun's just setting and I'm about to head home, but I quickly want to talk about like the difference. There's a lot of differences actually I want to talk about. We're going to talk about them more at home, but I want to talk about the difference between like the two focal lengths that I use, the 35 to 150 and then the 17 to 70, which again is like, what, like a 25 to 105-ish equivalent. And I was really surprised by this because going in, I kind of had the preconceived notion that I would like the 35 to 150 more because it's a wider focal range. But I actually thought that the 17 to 70 lens was actually better, at least for filming basketball. Like, I enjoyed it more. It's because I just appreciated having that wide end when I was under the basket. I found that the shots coming at me that were ultra wide were like more dynamic and I guess more useful in edits, or at least I enjoyed them more visually. And the quality was pretty good when I was turning around in-game edits in real time. If you're a beginner in that intermediate or enthusiast range, then the 17 to 70 crop sensor lens, like obviously on a crop sensor camera, is actually a good bet for you. And I'm not sure if you necessarily need to make the jump to the 35 to 150, depending on what you're doing, obviously, until you're at a more professional level or until you're like making more money to justify the cost. But this is why I was kind of hesitant to talk about the 17 to 70 for so long. I felt like you were always better getting the full frame option. That way when you upgrade your camera to a full frame camera, you have a lens that matches. Unlike what I initially thought, I think the conclusion that I'm going to draw is that if you have a crop sensor camera and you do something where you need the wide angle lens really badly and you don't have time to switch lenses, like you can't have a wide angle prime that you use instead, you need to be able to like crash zoom out, for example, what we did today. That's a situation where I actually think that the 17 to 70 on a crop sensor lens is more valuable than the 35 to 150, specifically regarding the focal length. There's obviously a lot of things about the 35 to 150 and the full frame setup today that we used as a whole that I thought far and away outperformed the crop sensor setup.
Now we've discussed focal length, but what are some other factors that could possibly differentiate this full frame camera setup from our crop camera setup, which kind of seems like it might be winning right now? One thing that I definitely want to make a note of, and especially after getting home and settling in and having some time to look through all the footage that we filmed, is the low light capabilities of these two cameras and what the low light capabilities specifically allow you to do in terms of frame rate and shutter speed. So I had no problem in the gym that I was filming in, which, to be clear, was a professional environment with like really professional lighting, filming with either of these two cameras up to 60 frames per second. And the footage came out looking just fine. Noise was perfectly acceptable. I was sitting around ISO 2500 or so on both cameras, and I was very happy with the results. Where the full frame setup pulls away and shows what you're getting for all of that extra money is when you're filming at 120 frames per second and you need extra light to hit that sensor. I found that the 120 frame per second footage that I filmed on the crop sensor camera was noisy, not unacceptably noisy. Like you could do some noise reduction, or you could crush your blacks to get rid of some of the noise, or there's like things you can do to manage it. But the image on the crop sensor camera, when you're pushing ISO 4000 and higher, just doesn't look as good. Whereas the image on the full frame setup, especially considering the FX3's dual native ISO at ISO 12800, looks much better. If you were able to put an ND filter on the front of your camera and use that second native ISO of 12800, then you could get like a really sharp image. I did not do this for this particular experiment. I just rolled with whatever settings made sense for both cameras in the environment that I was in. And I found that the crop sensor camera just couldn't hold up to my full frame setup when filming in 120 frames per second and when I needed a low light. I actually had the option to continue over cranking my shutter if I wanted to in 120 frames per second, which I actually did when on the full frame sensor, but on the crop sensor camera, I was not able to over crank, and I still wasn't quite as pleased with the results that I got. I also surprisingly really missed the custom function buttons on the more professional full frame lens that I didn't have on the more affordable crop sensor lens, which is ironic because when I first started out, I actually didn't ever use custom function buttons on a lens and I didn't care for them. But as my filming style has evolved and as I've worked more, I've started to rely more on the custom function buttons on the lens to make really quick swaps. Yes, when I'm filming basketball and court sports, but especially if I'm filming field sports, because a lot of the times I'll be on sticks, so I'll have one hand on the lens and one hand on a handle controlling my tripod or my hi-hat, and I won't have a hand on the camera body. So it's much more convenient in those situations. Mind you, I also think it's much more convenient in almost every situation to make quick changes to key features and settings on your lens. So not being able to quickly toggle between manual focus and autofocus to quickly catch my focus was annoying on the crop sensor setup, and I found that sometimes my shot would go out of focus because I was using autofocus and I wasn't able to switch to manual and pull manual focus for a bit. This isn't a cinema lens, you know what I mean? Like it's a photography lens and it's a more budget one at that. So I didn't feel great pulling manual focus with it because it didn't seem like I could make predictable focus throws necessarily. And I didn't want to get into that. I just knew autofocus for fast moving subjects in an environment like that was going to perform better for me. And I usually shoot with autofocus with those types of things. And then I control it using the custom function buttons on the lens. So I guess for my filming style, I'm saying that the more professional lens was better for me specifically. To kind of wrap this video up and answer the question I posed at the start of the video, is it worth upgrading from a crop sensor camera setup with an affordable lens and a very powerful, affordable body for $2,500 to a significantly more expensive full frame setup? Ironically, if you're filming in more amateur environments where the lighting is worse and conditions are more unpredictable and there's less pre-production that goes into things, you're not totally sure what environment you're going to be shooting in, then the professional setup is actually going to perform better because it'll keep you more adaptable to changing conditions, and you'll be able to get really clean images if you get stuck in a low light situation. For example, a gym that doesn't have enough lights to properly light the court the way that you would like as a videographer or a photographer. But in the more professional environment where you have really good lighting on the court, as you saw in the game that we filmed, you can actually get away with the more amateur budget friendly setup as long as you know what settings you're using. So that's a weird dilemma to put someone in, because I don't want to tell someone who's just beginning to do this as a hobby to go spend $6,000 on like this way over the top expensive camera setup that they shouldn't necessarily have, probably won't maximize, and really just don't need to buy. If you are doing this full time, like someone like myself, like this is how you make all your money, this is what you do, and you can justify investing in something that's more expensive that I wouldn't suggest for a hobbyist or a prosumer, and you're gonna get your return on investment on that, then I think it's worth spending that money, even if the increase in quality in a lot of different environments, my voice is cracked, is marginal. If you're not sure if you want to do this full time, or you just want to kind of dip your toes in the water, but you want images that look good, then I think that actually getting a crop sensor setup at the start and saving some money, focusing on good affordable lenses and not worrying too much about spending a ton of money on a camera body is kind of the way to go. because as I proved in this video, you can produce really good images with it that you can be proud of and the clients will be happy with. But there's also lots of room for you to grow. You can buy that camera when you don't know very much and are at the beginner phase. You can learn with it. You can start using more settings. You can figure out ways to get creative to make your image with that camera look better. You can upgrade your lenses as you progress, and you can get to a point where you're making professional work with a budget setup. And then if you want to take that leap down the road, you always have the option to. So that's kind of my conclusion for all of this. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope it was informative for you and not too rambly. If you did enjoy it, then please subscribe to the channel, because I post videography and video editing tips and tutorial videos similar to this one on a regular basis, and I'd love to have you around for that. If you have any questions or anything like that, let me know down in the comment section. I want to hear which of these camera setups you preferred, which one you would get in your own shoes right now. Give me your reasoning down in the comments. And yeah, tell me whatever videos you want to see. I'm going to be making a lot of content on this channel, as I have been doing. But that's all for this one. So until next time, peace.